Good evening, everybody. This is the Passball Show brought to you by JohnPielli.com. Just a reminder, 732-364-3598. Anything that's on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. A couple things we're going to get into today, and I got to be honest, I've said this to myself, once I run out of gas per se, we'll cut the show short. If I give you an hour's worth of constant information and perspective, I'm going to keep it going. I'll be happy this week. We got a guest set up for this Thursday. Former NFL kicker Nick Lowry will be joining the program Thursday in the second part of the show. So we got that coming up. I promise you we'll have a guest on tomorrow where we'll return to the program 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, same time Thursday. And then Friday we'll be on a little bit later from 8 to 9. I'm messing around with the time a little bit, trying to see if there is a certain time where I could get the most interaction, the most people involved, most people interested. And, feel free. Send it through the feed, whether it's through Periscope, whether it's through Facebook Live, or if you're listening on demand through YouTube, just throw a comment. If there's a certain time that you think works best for you, maybe you're in West Coast and, you prefer a little bit later. I'm all right with it. I want to do the show where we're getting the most interaction, obviously most positive vibes. And we're talking about the world of sports, talking about, whether it's baseball in particular. We've been spending a lot of time talking about the NFL, certain things going on in the league. Obviously, you had the game in New Orleans or the game in Minnesota against New Orleans on Sunday night, the incredible finish, and obviously, a polarizing topic. A guy ends up missing a tackle, a guy sprints, another guy sprints 61 yards for a touchdown with time expiring. It's almost like one of those scenes you see in a movie. And I don't think you could have written the script any better. Obviously, if you are a Minnesota Vikings fan, the excitement's coming up. It's been a little while since they've had a chance to play in a Super Bowl. And obviously there is that possibility, which we almost thought at some point would be unfathomable. We always joke around about it when an NFL season starts, especially when you have a Super Bowl in a certain city that has a sports team that plays there, has a football team that, you'd love to see them have that home Super Bowl. And we've gotten as close as we've ever gotten to have a home team in a Super Bowl. The Minnesota Vikings one win away, and I think from a lot of fan standpoints, and when I'm not talking about the average football fan that happens to be a fan of one particular team, but from a football fan standpoint, that would be pretty cool. Be pretty good for the city of Minnesota to not only host the Super Bowl, but to have their football team in the Super Bowl, which is something that once again has never happened in the 50-plus year history of the big game. We're going to start out by talking a little bit of baseball, and I was, kind of throwing back and forth and thinking about, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and we spoke a little bit yesterday about the trade that sent Andrew McCutchen to the San Francisco Giants, and certainly sets them up in a position where they are pretty much in a fire sale type of mode. And that means sometimes that other players are up for grabs and other players could be had, certainly for the right price. But if you look at the price that was paid, first for Garrett Cole, I think they got more quantity than quality back in that trade. I was mentioning some of the top prospects of the Houston Astros, whether it was a Forrest Whitley or a Preston Tucker or, certain guys like that, Francis Martes. You're looking at guys that were up at the absolute top of the pecking order in regards to interest from other teams. And the Houston Astros were able to get Garrett Cole for less than that. And if you look at Andrew McCutchen going to the Giants, a package of players that was less than stellar. So the value of the Pittsburgh Pirates players are certainly, is up to question in regards to what they're getting in return to these trades. So you look at a guy like Josh Harrison, and you hear a lot of discussion on the local front about him being a possibility for the New York Mets. And if you look at his contract situation, $10.5 million for next year. I'm sorry, $10 $250,000 for next year, $10.5 million option for 2019 with a $1 million buyout if the Pirates or whatever team that he happens to be playing for decides to exercise that option. There is another option for 2020, which is $11.5 million and a $500K buyout. So from a financial standpoint, you get him 1 year, a little over $10 million, probably not a bad price for a guy that you would consider a starting second baseman, a guy that has played all around the diamond, has the ability to help you out as a utility player, whether you play him at third base, you want to play him in the corner outfield. He's also played shortstop. He's also pitched a game. But the issue that I got with Josh Harrison, and he's 29 years old, he'll be 30 coming into next year, is I know he's battled a little bit of injuries, but he has been pretty much a utility player. He had that 1 year in 2014 where it was probably his breakout year or his best season to date. He played all over the diamond, corner outfield, second base, third base, a little bit of shortstop, but played in 143 games that year. Hit 13 home runs, 52 runs batted in, 315 average, 837 OPS. Now, if you're talking about a player now in 2018 that was going to put up similar numbers to that, 347 on base, almost a 500 slugging, would certainly have a ton of value for a lot of teams. But if you look back over the last couple seasons, 2015, 2016, a slugging percentage less than 400 both seasons. Was a little bit better this past season, hit a couple more home runs, but has not played in more than 131 games, 114 games in 15, 131 games in 15, 128 games last year. So he's battled a little bit of injuries. But to me, I'm looking at a player, and I would say, if I'm looking to add a player like this, especially to pay him over $10 million. Now, I understand we talk about salaries in baseball, and we understand it's all understood that players are going to be making a certain amount of money. So $10 million for a player that may turn out to be your everyday second baseman or is expecting to be your everyday second baseman is not that big of a deal. But I want to know with this acquisition that I'm going to get a player that is pretty close to what we saw in 2014 when he had the 837 OPS, 133 OPS plus. His OPS plus, which, by the way, is on-base plus slugging adjusted to the ballpark, we use 100 as a barometer to say that that is your average and ordinary player. So that's league average. His OPS plus this past year was 101. So you're talking about a guy, number one, you're going to be paying $10 million to for this coming season. I'm not worried about the buyout if he doesn't live up to hype, if he's not closer to 2014 than he was 2017, then I buy out his option and let him become a free agent. But I don't know. I mean, nothing really excites me about Josh Harrison. And I understand we're talking about the price to pay for a player in regards to what you're going to be trading for. You're probably not going to be giving up very much. You may give the Pittsburgh Pirates a little piece that they could work with, somebody that may be part of the future, but certainly is not going to be a core piece going forward. That part of it I understand. And if you're a fan out there, especially a fan of the New York Mets, and you say Josh Harrison will be a good acquisition for you, I'm okay with that up to a certain point. I just think right now that there are better options out there. And when we look at the world of free agency and the 100-something free agents that are out there and left and remaining, I think you can, number one, make a smaller investment in regards to one of these free agents. And I'm not talking about anybody crazy. I'm talking about a Yunel Escobar. I'm talking about maybe a Jose Reyes. Or maybe if you want to go over the longer term of a 2-3 year deal, maybe a Todd Frazier. I look at those three players and I think that they all have a little more to offer than a Josh Harrison at this stage of his career. And I don't mean it in a bad way towards Josh Harrison. Josh Harrison's obviously upset. Similar to the players that are in the Miami Marlins organization. The ones that are thinking coming into 2017 that they were going to make a push, a run to the postseason. and they see the season ends and all of a sudden there's a fire sale. The same thing's going on in Pittsburgh. And I understand fans are upset there. And you know what? Listen, I have a compassion for every fan base that exists in all of professional sports, because you go out there and you root for a team, and really what you ask for, and I know the diehards, or the certain ones, upper in the upper echelon, in the lower 5% or the top 5%, however you want to judge it, will expect their team to be competitive and win every year. It'll be pissed off and will look to blame, whether it is management, whether it's the players, whether it's the ownership, whatever it is that they want, every single year that their favorite team doesn't win. But the average fan just wants to enjoy some success, a sustained success over a certain amount of years, where they could go back 10 years from now and say, hey, that was a pretty fun time. The team was pretty good back then. Maybe they won a World Series. Maybe they went to another one. I look at the Philadelphia Phillies of 2007 to 2011, won 5 straight division titles. And with that 5 straight division titles, they won themselves a World Series. They got back to another one. The Kansas City Royals, who arguably, depending on how their offseason finishes off, because I don't think they're done yet, Eric Hosmer is still out there. Mike Moustakas is still out there. Lorenzo Cain is still out there. Alcides Escobar is still unsigned. So all of these players, the closer we get to spring training, and especially if there's no traction in regards to them heading to any particular destination, I think there's more of a possibility that the Royals could bring back 1 or 2 of them. Now, you could have said at the beginning of this offseason that there was no chance they were bringing back any of those free agents. I would say, if I'm a betting man, I would put some odds on them bringing back Eric Hosmer. They've already, within a contract offer, shown that they are willing to pay a pretty decent price. Give him a contract that nobody else has gotten in their franchise history. Now that I know they're in it, unless the Padres are going to up the ante a little bit and go maybe 160 or something over the course of 8 years, I think the Royals are the favorites. So going back to the point that I was making in regards to fan bases, the Royals had a little bit of a run. Now, we'll see how things go, whether or not they still have anything left in regards to a run with this core group of players that they have. Odds are it's close to being over. Odds are they're going to have to go to a certain sort of rebuild, maybe a retooling, maybe a re-identification of what their team is going to be over the next several seasons. It's going to look a little different. There's no question about it. But when, as a fan of a sports team, you want to have a run that you could go back on 10 years or 20 years down the road and say, you know what? I loved when I was a fan back then. Those were the days. You hope to have a lot of them. You hope to be the fan of a team like the New York Yankees, who always seem to have a run in them, or whatever one of the top teams are that happen to be in a run. You talk about the Cardinals or the Red Sox or the Giants. All those teams had serious runs where they were a legitimate contender, won multiple World Series over a period of years. And, I say it from a perspective of a fan that hasn't seen a ton of winning. And sometimes that's just the cards you're dealt, and you accept that. You hope that down the road things will get a little better for your particular organization, but you understand that unless you're employed by them in some way, shape, or form, you have absolutely no say. You could be the greatest fan in the world. You can have season tickets and go to 81 home games and every single preseason game and every single postseason game. It's not going to guarantee you having any input whatsoever on what you see on a baseball field. So back to Josh Harrison, and I've kind of long-winded this point. I look at him as an okay fit. The Pirates probably at this stage of the game can probably get them off their hands for a team taking on his contract. I don't think the Pirates are going to be paying anything towards Josh Harrison's contract. So if you are a potential team that's looking to add him, understand that the Pirates probably could move him for the lack of having to pick up any of his salary. So I just look at other potential candidates, and I look at a guy like Yunel Escobar, and it was only a couple of years ago with the Washington Nationals. He kind of had a breakout season. Now, he was injured last year, so he wasn't the same player. His batting average is decent. His OPS is okay. You get a guy that's probably about mid-sevens in regards to OPS, which in regards to ballpark factors probably puts you a little over or a little under in regards to the average baseball player. And I think this is a guy that can hit for a little sneaky power. He's going to get some hits. Doesn't have very much speed. Plays good defense. Can play the third base or second base or shortstop. But I'm sure can be had as a free agent for maybe a 2-year deal with about maybe $6 to $7 million. I look at what Howie Kendrick signed with the Washington Nationals. Now, he was very quietly a very productive player last year. Now, it kind of got thrown under the radar a little bit because he started the season with Philadelphia. Phillies looked at him as kind of a super utility player. He's playing some outfield, some infield, was kind of doing whatever the Phillies needed. Now, the Nationals made a move for him around the trading deadline, a little bit after. They add him as a utility player. His playing time diminished a little bit. It's hard to get in there when Anthony Rendon's playing third base and Daniel Murphy's playing second base, and you got Bryce Harper. Ryan Zimmerman had a career year last year. So where exactly do you expect Howie Kendrick to play? So his playing time diminished a little bit. He hit 340 for the Phillies. He hit only 293 for the Nationals, but was very productive. So he signed as a free agent, a 2-year contract for about $7 million. Now, I think for a guy that has the ability to play multiple positions, has shown that if you need him to go in there and play every single day, he can do it. He's done it for many years. He's a very good veteran presence in a clubhouse. I look at that guy as being very valuable. I think he may be more valuable than a Josh Harrison. So if you're thinking average annual value of 2 years and $7 million, $3.5 million, that's a pretty good investment for a player that could be an everyday player if you need him to be. Now, the Nationals probably won't need him to be, but you never know what happens in regards to injuries. So you may need him to play, 130, 140 games for you. And he's got the track record to show that he can do it. Yunel Escobar last year, I thought digressed a little bit. I thought, if you're going to compare him to Howie Kendrick, I think you got a lot more out of him, and I think there's a lot more going forward that you could expect out of a Howie Kendrick than a Josh Harrison. Now, look at Jose Reyes. And Jose Reyes obviously has the ties to the New York Mets, playing there for 11 of the 15 years that he's played in his career, including the better part of the last 2. Now, his numbers for the season last year, they don't stand out. Just a 246 average. The OPS about 728. He did hit 15 home runs, which is the most he hit in a single season since 2008. But his second half numbers, he hit 288. He had an OPS up in about 850s over the course of the second half of the season. He was healthy. He looked comfortable. And you know what? He looked like a player that has something more to offer over the next couple of years. Now, I think from a fan standpoint, you'd like to have that homegrown player that has been part of your organization and part of your team for a long time. The question in regards to it being a fit for the Mets, are they going to be okay with the lineup the way it's set? Now, to me, if you're going to make a move like a Harrison or an Escobar, I'd rather it be Jose Reyes. Does Reyes have enough ability to be a leadoff man? Yes, he could be a productive leadoff man. Certainly isn't what he was 4 or 5 years ago. So you think of Reyes leading off. You got Asdrubal Cabrera, who doesn't have a ton of power. You got Cespedes, Conforto, and Bruce, You know Cespedes and Conforto are coming off of injuries. I just think the Mets need a little more power in the middle of their lineup. So if you're asking me, Harrison, Escobar, or Reyes, I'd probably choose Jose Reyes. But I look at the best fit right now for the Mets lineup, and I think of Conforto and Bruce being lefties. I think of Cespedes being a righty. To add one more power bat to that lineup where you're not necessarily expecting him to be an absolute star. But if you look at Todd Frazier over the last 4 seasons, he hit 27 home runs last year, which was the least amount of home runs he hit over the last 4 years. I know his batting average declined, but here's a guy that I think would be the perfect number 6 hitter in a Mets lineup. Let's say you use some combination of Conforto, Cespedes, Bruce, 3, 4, 5 in your lineup to have another guy after that can hit for some legitimate power. You could put him in a position where he's going to get some good opportunities to hit. You maybe pitch around a Bruce when he's hitting well, or whatever one of the 3 is your hottest hitter, and you sit Frazier right behind him. He's obviously a good defensive third baseman, and I think if I'm looking at his batting average last year, which combined between the Chicago White Sox and the New York Yankees was .213, I'm willing to make a bet that he is a better hitter average-wise than we saw last year. Now, for his career, he's hitting .245. He hasn't smelled that since 2015, where he hit .255. So you watched his average drop to .225 to .213 over the past 2 seasons. But I think this is a player that I would be willing to put a little money on in regards to betting that he can bounce back and be maybe a .240 or .250 hitter. And if he is with 30 home runs, that's a pretty good addition to your lineup. The other player that I'm willing to consider, and I'm surprised some of these guys aren't signed yet, because you look at the players I just mentioned, whether it's a Harrison, who obviously is under contract with the Pirates, or an Escobar or a Reyes or a Frazier, or Mike Moustakas for that matter. You're looking at infielders, and I could name a ton of teams that have needs in regards to infielders, whether it's second baseman or third baseman. You could throw Neil Walker into the mix. A lot of pretty good players that you could put in a position and say, hey, I'm going to trust them to go out there and play 140, 150 games at that position. I look at Eduardo Nunez, and I tell you, he had a very good season last year, combined for the Giants and the Boston Red Sox. And I know he's kind of taken a step above being a utility player, a guy who could play multiple positions, probably none of them well defensively, by the way. So the one negative, if we're analyzing Eduardo Nunez, is the fact that he is an awful defensive player. I don't know if you could hide him in a lineup, because what he provides for you offensively, it's not like he's a big-time power hitter. And you could say, hey, if I DH him the majority of the time, we'll get value for it. American League teams are looking for a guy that's going to hit 25 to 30 home runs if they're going to sit somebody every day in their designated hitter position. Eduardo Nunez is a good player. I think his ability to play multiple positions, you have to have caution with that, because you realize he doesn't play any of these positions defensively particularly well. But you're looking at a guy that hit .313 for two different teams, 308 for the Giants and 321 for the Boston Red Sox. So he's pretty consistent. Showed a little more power for the Red Sox. And I think, in a lineup that was long, but an offense that didn't produce as much, but a lineup that you would say 1 through 9 was fairly long. If you're an American League team matching up against the Boston Red Sox, you knew that you had a long way to go in regards to seeing different, matchup problems. The middle of that order is tough, but as you push down later on towards the end of that lineup, you still have a little bit of fear. And that's where Eduardo Nunez kind of fit in perfect with them. Rafael Devers was playing against righties. Nunez was playing against lefties, if he was batting eighth or ninth or seventh in the lineup, there's a chance that pitchers are going to pitch around certain other hitters that they don't want to face. And then that leads you to some fastballs, some pitches over the plate, and a chance to drive and do some damage. But I look at Eduardo Nunez, and I think he could be. If you put a gun to my head and you say, all right, go back to that first group that I was saying, Escobar, Reyes, Harrison. I don't really want to pay Josh Harrison $10 million. And I don't care, if the what you're giving up in return is minuscule. But I'd rather go towards a Reyes or even an Escobar. Now, if Frazier ends up being priced out or he finds a different home or decides he wants to go back to the Yankees, I would say number 2 on my list outside of Frazier would be Eduardo Nunez. And, think about it from a matchup standpoint, and I know this is a big if, but, David Wright is trying to make a comeback. He's trying to get back on the field. And let's say he's healthy enough and he feels good enough to give you a couple solid months. Well, Eduardo Nunez goes to the bench to a utility role, and he probably doesn't sulk about it. He probably doesn't, give you a hard time about it. He's a guy that's been a utility player, was with the Giants after they acquired him from the Minnesota Twins in 2016, was kind of in that same role last year after the Giants traded him to the Red Sox. And I think he could be had on a similar deal to that of Howie Kendrick. So that's where I go. I see what the market is for Frazier. I think he would be a very good number 6 hitter in the Mets lineup. Then I would go to Nunez. And if that doesn't work out, then I bring back Jose Reyes. So that's pretty much what I'm thinking. I'm just not as bullish in regards to wanting to pursue Josh Harrison. I know he wants out of Pittsburgh. And a lot of people probably do want out that haven't spoken about it yet. But I look at it, and I think it's a very good, he will end up with a team that's going to help. The other aspect of, what I do want to get into is, you look at these pitchers that are out there, whether it's Yu Darvish, whether it's Jake Arrieta, Alex Cobb, Lance Lynn. And on a normal year, guys like Alex Cobb and Lance Lynn would be landing pretty good contracts. They'd be getting 5 years, 70, 80 million. It's probably not going to happen this year. And I tell you, you look at the 2 top guys right now in regards to Darvish and Arrieta, I could see both of them individually signing that surprise contract with a team that nobody thought was in the mix. Because now as we get close, we're halfway through January, we're almost into February. The usual suspects, you would say probably the Cubs, maybe the Dodgers, the couple other teams that you may see, hey, you know what, they could use some pitching. A lot of weird stuff going on with the Baltimore Orioles with the thoughts of trading Manny Machado. But in a normal season, you would expect the Orioles to be in it for a big pitcher. They have such a good offense. They have a good bullpen. They have a great manager. The one thing they've been lacking over the last several seasons has been starting pitching. And they've been taking flyers on guys that could have some upside, but have done absolutely nothing for them. Whether it's Ubaldo Jimenez, Yovani Gallardo, Wade Miley, Jeremy Hellickson, who they traded for at the end of last season. They've taken flyers and shots on guys that you could say, yeah, you know what? They may have some upside, but I don't look at any one of those guys as an ace. So you'd have to give me an idea exactly what it is that the Baltimore Orioles are doing. What are their plans for this year? Do they think the Yankees got too good? Do they not think down the road that they're going to be able to compete with the likes of the Yankees and the Red Sox in that division? Maybe. And that's a discussion that they could probably have within themselves. They don't have to make that information public. But I tell you, if the Orioles were looking to compete right now for 2018, I would throw the money out that it would take to get Jake Arrieta. I would throw that money out that it would take to get a Yu Darvish. Obviously, Arrieta has the ties to the Orioles. He came up with them. The Orioles fans in the front office, and I'm sure there's people that lost their job over that trade that sent Arrieta and Pedro Strop to the Cubs for Steve Clevenger and Scott Feldman. I'm sure somebody lost their job for that trade. And hey, if the Orioles believe enough over the course of the next 4 or 5 years that they'd like to have what they missed out on when they traded, tell you, ideally, all things equal, I would say that is the perfect fit. But you also have to tell me what the Baltimore Orioles are doing. You got to give me an idea that the Orioles want to compete this year and in future years. As we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show. John Pielli here with you, number 732-364-3598, 732-364-3598. Anything on your mind in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. So if you're going to tell me what I think the ideal fit is for Jake Arrieta, tell me that the Baltimore Orioles are serious about contending, and I would say it is the Orioles. Outside of that, I would think that there is some rapport that exists continuously, some dialogue that's going on between Arrieta and the Cubs. I mean, here's a guy that, pretty much came from a point where there was potential to an all of a sudden star to a Cy Young Award winner. I'm sure Cubs fans will be happy to get Arrieta back. There's also some discussion that, maybe they are interested in Yu Darvish. Theo Epstein, back to his days in Boston, was pursuing Darvish as much as anybody. I don't know we forget because he ends up signing with the Rangers and, he was there for a long time, but Epstein and the Red Sox were very interested in Darvish, pretty similar to the way you could say that either the Yankees or the Mariners or even the San Diego Padres were very interested in Shohei Ohtani. In the end, Ohtani just got to pick whatever team it was that he wanted to go to, and he chose the Angels. But it doesn't mean that the Yankees or the Mariners or the Padres were not as excited and ambitious and interested in bringing Ohtani to their team. They just didn't get the player. So maybe there's enough of a thought. Now, obviously, the price would have to go down for a little bit. I'm sure Yu Darvish is still looking for that big contract. The one thing that I would say all these big-time free agent pitchers, and when I say big-time, I'll start with the four that I just mentioned: Arrieta, Darvish, Lynn, and Cobb. Because I think, Darvish and Arrieta could be number ones, but I think Cobb and Lynn on the right team could be number twos. And it could be twos on a good team. But one thing that hasn't happened this offseason, there's so many players that are still out there as free agents that have not been signed. So if you're going to tell me exactly what the market is, what exactly is the market for an Arrieta or a Darvish, I don't think it's been set yet. Now, some teams have gone out there and they've signed a couple, pitchers to one-year deals and stuff like that. But what does a top-of-the-rotation pitcher like an Arrieta or a Darvish, what type of value does that pitcher have in 2018? Because that's another question that has to be asked. We've talked about the transition in a game of baseball, and if you follow this offseason at all, even for 1 second, you'll see the one particular player that has benefited from being a free agent is a middle relief pitcher. It's not just closers. It's setup men. It's seventh inning guys. It's eighth inning guys. Teams are sucking these guys up because they really feel the value in having those extra arms in the latter part of the game. What does that mean? It means the value of a big-time starting pitcher is lukewarm at best. And the reason I say it's lukewarm as opposed to completely shot is you have to tell me that there's a bona fide ace, a number one, a Chris Sale, a Max Scherzer, a Clayton Kershaw, that has the ability to go out there and pitch 70 innings on any given night, and they are being held back because of a system. And you got to tell me that the Dodgers have decided in regards to their pursuit of using analytics to their advantage that they would consider pulling Clayton Kershaw out after 6 innings or after 18 batters. And hypothetically, I'd want to know the same thing with the Red Sox and Chris Sale and the Nationals and Max Scherzer and the Indians and Corey Kluber. Sorry about that. Because if the thought is that you're not signing Jake Arrieta to be a 7/8 inning pitcher or 7 or 8 inning pitcher, then I see the value of that top line starting pitcher going down and going down considerably. I'm not paying $20 million a year for a pitcher like that if I'm only viewing him as a guy that's going to pitch 6 innings regularly and only getting a chance to pitch 7 or 8 if they absolutely have it. If they have no-hitter stuff, they pitch 7-8. If not, they're leading way into this great bullpen that Team X has assembled and built and put together. So I do think that there is some dialogue going on within organizations to say, what do you value that big-time starting pitcher at? And sure, teams that have money would have no problem throwing $20 million a year at Jake Arrieta. And you may very well get your money's worth with that. But if you look at, you take Zack Greinke and his contract with the Arizona Diamondbacks as an example. The game has changed right before our eyes. And unfortunately, if you wanted to compare the market in regards to starting pitchers and the value of starting pitchers to that of the housing market in 2007, 2008. You bought a house around that time. Let's say you bought a house in 2006, 2007. You probably paid for or committed to in a long-term mortgage a lot of money. Your monthly payments are very high. The amount of money that you owe on a house is high. All of a sudden, a couple of years later, that house that you bought is worth nowhere near what you paid for it. Yeah, maybe you could refinance and get a little bit of a better interest rate, maybe lower your monthly payment a little bit, but you still owe a lot more money than what that house is worth. That's the best description I could give for a Zack Greinke. Because he signs a contract, and the Diamondbacks didn't hold anything back with this. They paid him $34 million a year for 2016 and 2017. 2018, he'll make another $34 million. He'll make $34.5 in 2019, another $35 million for 2020 and 2021. Zack Greinke could have his best 2 or 3 years ahead of him, which I don't know. I mean, if you look at his numbers last year, he was very good. Pitched to a 3.20 ERA coming off of a down season, was right up there. Probably wasn't as good as what he was in his free agent year when he walked away from the Los Angeles Dodgers in 2015. But he's still close to a number one. But my question I ask you, going into 2018, how do you use a Zack Greinke? Do you use him as that bona fide number one ace? In other words, do I expect him more often than not to pitch 7 innings and go into the 8th inning? And assume his stuff is average to above average. I'm not talking about that rare occurrence where he's throwing BBs and he's absolutely unhittable. Because then, any pitcher in that caliber can conceivably throw a complete game, even in this day and age. But I look at Zack Greinke and I say he is the perfect comparison to what happened with the housing market in 2006, 2007, going into 2008. The Diamondbacks bought him or signed him when they thought that the value for pitchers like that was only going to go up. What happened? And I don't think we could have predicted this. I think, people with the sabermetric mindset could have said that this was coming. But similar to the housing market, it probably wasn't expected to come at the rate or as fast as it did. You saw the use of super bullpens, whether it was with the Royals. Obviously, you look at the last couple of years with teams like the Orioles and the Yankees. Even the Chicago Cubs did a very good job of the use of their bullpen. They may not have had those absolute stud names, but they were throwing guys out there in the 7th and 8th inning that had closer stuff. Most teams right now going into 2018 don't just have a 9th inning closer. They got an 8th inning closer and a 7th inning closer, and probably have 1 or 2 guys that could throw 95 plus that could pitch in the 6th inning if you need them to. When Zack Greinke signed that contract with the Arizona Diamondbacks, thought was it could be potentially coming. But we didn't know it was going to happen this fast. So now, in the day and age that we're at, we're looking at Jake Arrieta, we're looking at Yu Darvish, and we're wondering exactly when is going to be the right time for these pitchers to sign. And a lot of it's going to have to do with price. How much is a team willing to invest? Not necessarily in regards to years, but average annual value, or how much is a pitcher like that worth? Because outside of the 4 that I mentioned before, Sale, Kershaw, Scherzer, Kluber, anybody else that's a top starter is kind of a tweener. It's kind of a guy that, hey, if they have good stuff, yeah, they're pitching 7-8. But if they're throwing a lot of pitches or they're a little bit off, they may not be getting through the 6th inning. So I don't put that pitcher at the same type of value. Zack Greinke, in my opinion, is probably the tweener to the tweeners. In other words, he's above that of a tweener and is probably just in small echelon below that ace. Madison Bumgarner, particularly because of the injuries coming off him, is probably in the same category. I can expect both of these pitchers to be absolute Cy Young candidates this year. But the question I want to ask is, what can you expect from Jake Arrieta, and what can you expect from Yu Darvish going forward? Because that's what they're going to be judged by in their next contract that they sign. I think of a lot of different options, and I still think there's going to be a lot of teams that are in play. Some teams that are in play right now are teams that you might not even be thinking about right now. The Houston Astros are set. They got Verlander and Keuchel, and they traded for Garrett Cole. Neither of these pitchers are going to be going to Houston. I can promise you that. But, I started with Baltimore because I really think that if Baltimore wants to compete, and I have to partially assume that the Baltimore Orioles are going to want to compete, I would think that they would be willing to throw a couple more bucks towards an Arrieta or a Darvish than one of these other teams. The New York Yankees are interesting. But just listening a little too much to New York sports talk, you tend to get more of an impression that they really need a Darvish or an Arrieta type than they really do. Luis Severino took huge steps last year, and right now is absolutely my number 1 pitcher. He is the New York Yankees ace. He's a guy you developed yourself. He hasn't even entered the prime of his career. He is still extremely young. You add to that Masahiro Tanaka, who is coming off of a down year, but is still a legitimate 1 or 2. And then you also got Sonny Gray, who was a number 1 with Oakland, is probably a fine number 2 or 3 with the Yankees. But if you hear the talking heads in regards to New York, you think that the Yankees pitching staff, their starting pitchers look terrible. They brought CC Sabathia back for $10 million. Jordan Montgomery is good. They have Justice Sheffield and Chance Adams in the minors on their way up. If you make a move for a number 5 starter, Jaime Garcia was their 5th starter last year. If you think of a Jeremy Hellickson or a Clay Buchholz or somebody at that echelon to go out there every 5th day and maybe be skipped every once in a while, I'm sure that pitcher would be fine. But I just think, once again, because things in New York always get overblown and overhyped, mountain gets made of an anthill just about every single day when something gets brought up in the world of New York sports. The Yankees don't need to add a Yu Darvish. They don't. And if the thought is, hey, we'll take Yu Darvish if he takes a considerable amount of money less, that's even more so. I think in the end, Darvish is probably an $18 to $20 million pitcher. And I think you could say the same about Jake Arrieta right now at this moment. What could benefit either one of those pitchers or both of them is if they could get, let's say, 2 teams that want them just as much. The price gets upped a little bit and they get a little more than expected. But right now, I think about 18 to 20 million over the course of a 4 or 5 year deal could probably be enough to get either one of them. Now, you also have to ask the agents what they think about it. Ask the players what they think about it. If they're looking at a Scherzer contract or a David Price contract or a Zack Greinke contract, and they're using that as a barometer in regards to what they expect to get, number one, I think they're going to be disappointed because there's not one team right now that has a need for that type of starting pitcher that would need that pitcher that bad and would consider spending that kind of money on right now. It doesn't exist. That Arizona isn't out there. That Washington is not out there. I just told you enough reasons why the New York Yankees would not be willing to pay that much money, plus the fact they want to stay under the luxury tax threshold. So do the Dodgers. So do the Giants. For Arrieta or Darvish, I think the Cubs make sense. I'd have to look at their luxury tax situation. I'm sure they're pretty close to being under. Probably could afford to make a signing like that without going over. And you know what? What's to say that the Cubs would not be against going over the luxury tax threshold? Do they legitimately think of themselves as being in the market for a Bryce Harper? I mean, Manny Machado, to add him, I guess you want to play him at shortstop. You want to move Brian off third base. I don't know. I look at the Cubs, and I think they have enough offense to begin with. I don't think they need to necessarily jump into sweepstakes for a Harper or a Machado. So if you look at the chance of putting the best Chicago Cubs team on the field for next year, I think it would behoove them to sign either a Darvish or an Arrieta. And I'm sure Jed Hoyer and Theo Epstein have been talking with the agents, trying to figure out which one is more in a reasonable enough price range. And they can pretty much choose either one they want, because I don't think that there is another legitimate team that's going to go out there and compete to a point where you say, wow, I'm worried that this team is going to offer more money than the Chicago Cubs will. I think of a team like the Milwaukee Brewers, and I thought they did a lot of good things last year. Offensively, they took some steps in a very good direction, and I think it's kind of underrated. I know that they were leading the division for a while. They were up for a playoff spot up until the last couple weeks of the season. But offensively, they got a lot out of Travis Shaw. They got a lot out of Domingo Santana. They also got a lot out of Arcia, the shortstop. He did a pretty good job for him. Eric Thames was all right. He got off to a great start, but cooled down. They still got Ryan Braun there. From an offensive standpoint, I think that's a team that can compete at the very least for the likes of a wild card spot. And I think they can give the Cubs a little bit of a run. So if I'm asking, all right, when is the opportune time to strike to add that legitimate number one pitcher? Remember, Jimmy Nelson is hurt. You're going to miss him at the start of next season. I tell you, Arrieta to the Arrieta to the Brewers looks pretty good. Put a gun to my head, I'd say Darvish goes to the Cubs and Arrieta goes to the Brewers. The question is, do the Brewers think enough about it now to invest that type of money on a starting pitcher? Because their starting pitcher investments over the last couple of years that they've made and within the last 5 or so have not been very good. They spent a lot of money on Matt Garza. That didn't really work out for them. They spent a lot of money on Kyle Loesch right before spring training one year. That didn't work out. They got Giovanni Gallardo coming back. They got the guy from the Padres, Julius Chassin. So they got a couple, quote-unquote, innings eaters. But I tell you, they would be in a very good shape. They would be in a very good position if they added that bona fide number one. And I would take them seriously because I think their performance offensively last year was not a joke. Shaw is coming into his own. Santana's coming into his own. Eric Thames, I think, will be better this year. Jonathan Villar had a down season. If he puts up numbers that he did in 2016, that offense is very good. They got a bona fide closer now in Corey Knebel, who kind of, fell off the tree to them. Guy who couldn't get anybody out a couple of years ago, all of a sudden throwing BBs, and is one of the premier closers in the National League. By the way, I hate to say it, but I'm predicting a little bit of Fernando Rodney in Corey Knebel next year. Sometimes a pitcher just comes out of nowhere and has that ridiculous season. The next year becomes a nightmare. Ask Fernando Rodney, because that happened to him more than once in his career. But I tell you, the Brewers would be in a great position if they added Jake Arrieta. And that leaves guys like Cobb and Lynn, who I think can help a number of teams. In fact, so many teams that I can't really analyze what teams I would expect. I look at the Philadelphia Phillies, and I've done a lot of analysis on them. I think they're a team that could be on the rise this year. I love the Carlos Santana signing. I think he's the perfect player there. I think he can hit 30 to 35 home runs just playing his home games at Citizens Bank Ballpark. You put him in a lineup with Rhys Hoskins, with a couple of their other younger players. Maybe it makes Maikel Franco a little bit better because you keep pushing him down in a lineup. He had an awful season last year. And you think about where do they stand in regards to pitching. And one of the things that happened for the Philadelphia Phillies that they could certainly build on for this year is the development of Aaron Nola. Here's a guy that a couple of years ago you looked at and you said he's legitimately going to be a top of the rotation pitcher. They were just waiting for it to happen. And as the season progressed last year, he got better and better and better. And I just look at the rest of the Phillies rotation, and I see a lot of upside, but I don't see a lot in regards to ink and print. There's a number of pitchers that contributed to the staff last year that I could see getting better. Vince Velasquez got off to such a great start for them. In 2016, he was very good at the beginning of the season. Was not good at all last year. And you wonder from a health standpoint, is his arm all right? Is his elbow okay? If they are, then I think he could crawl up and be a legitimate starter in that rotation. But guys like Jared Eichhoff, Ben Lively, Zach Eflin, they're all guys that are going to be in the mix. Jake Thompson, It was one of the guys they picked up in a trade for Cole Hamels, along with Eichhoff and Nick Williams and Alfaro, and I think there was one other player. I'm just running this off the top of my head. Phillies did a good job of adding to their bullpen. They got Hector Neris as their closer. They made the signings of Pat Neshek, brought him back, Tommy Hunter. Do the Phillies need to add a bona fide number one? I think the Phillies would be best suited to add themselves a Lance Lynn or an Alex Cobb. I think guys that could go out there, throw 200 innings, maybe get 200 strikeouts, and very quietly blend them in to be a 2 or a 3 or a number one if Aaron Nola is not ready to take that role yet. So I'm actually going to turn the last segment of this program into another version of Pielli's picks. And Pielli's picks in regards to baseball, we haven't touched on that in a little while. The record sits at 2-3. We picked a couple managers. We actually went 0 for 3. We made up for it by getting the 2 Cy Young awards right. But here we go. Pielli's picks. And we're going to do free agent pitcher version. So I don't forget, and obviously none of my fans would let me forget. We got them out there on the air, but I'll write them down as we go. And if you were listening to me for the last 5-10 minutes or so, you kind of have an idea of where I'm leaning. And we may do another version of Pielli's picks as we get closer to free agency and teams end up signing in regards to offensive players. But the first one we're going to go with Yu Darvish. And I got him going to the Cubs. I think the contract will be less than $100 million. I could think somewhere between $80, $90 million, 4-year commitment, somewhere along that line. I think that connection between Theo Epstein and the camp for Yu Darvish, there's enough there. So give me Yu Darvish to the Cubs. Pielli's pick number 1. Pick number 2. Jake Arrieta. And if you listen to me, like I said a couple minutes ago, you know where I'm leaning. And I can see Darvish going to the Cubs first. And then the Brewers reacting off of it by maybe giving Arrieta a little bit more. So pick number 2, Jake Arrieta to the Milwaukee Brewers. Pielli's pick number 3, Alex Cobb. The answer is there. I think it's a perfect fit for the Philadelphia Phillies. I think you slide him right behind Aaron Nola. Velasquez sitting there is kind of a 3 if he's ready. If he's not ready, maybe he's a 4. You got Lively, you got Jake Thompson, you got Eichhoff. You got enough options to fill out the rest of the rotation. But I think Cobb is an upgrade from a Clay Buchholz. You get him on a 4-year deal, and you think that Alex Cobb will be there once the Phillies are good again. So I'm sitting here with Pielli's pick number 4. And this is the only one that I haven't put a ton of thought into. But I'm thinking about where the best position for Lance Lynn will be. And obviously, you look at the Astros, and they put themselves in a very good position. And I look at another team that has been pretty active. And I'm going to go a little bit of a shocker here. But I like the offseason that the Los Angeles Angels have had. And they got some options in regards to filling out the rotation, whether it's a Matt Shoemaker or a Tyler Skaggs or a Garrett Richards. But I think of, Ohtani and then very quietly adding another starting pitcher. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and go with the last pick, and that's going to be Lance Lynn to the Los Angeles Angels. So Pielli's picks, free agent starting pitcher version, Yu Darvish to the Cubs, Jake Arrieta to the Milwaukee Brewers, Alex Cobb to the Philadelphia Phillies, and Lance Lynn to the Los Angeles Angels. We'll be back with you tomorrow, 6 to 7 p.m., right here on Periscope, Facebook Live, and available on demand at YouTube. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.